Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckham. My next guest is Tobias Jensen. Tobias is an expert on the blockchain, artificial intelligence, chatGPT, large language models, and how those all intersect with the professional community and also the legal community, which is something I'm very interested in. I've been using large language models and ChatGPT since early this year. I have found that it has put my professional practice on steroids, although it is far from perfect. And I don't know when it will ever be at a stage where you don't need some sort of human supervision of these artificial intelligence and large language models. In the podcast, Tobias and I talk about artificial intelligence generally, the problems, the perils, the pitfalls, the potential that artificial intelligence will make our lives way, way better and also way, way worse. We talk about large language models, chat GPT, how those work, things to be concerned about, things to be excited about. We talk about the interaction of business and professionals with these large language models, whether this is going to affect employment in the future, and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy this podcast. It's going to be the first podcast and hopefully a series of podcasts where we talk about the future of technology, the future of work, and all things related to that. And now I give you Tobias Jensen. Hey, everybody, this is Brian Beckham, and I have got Tobias Jensen on the show today. I've been looking for somebody over the past year. For people that listen to my show, they know how interested I am in kind of a broad variety of topics, but one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart is technology, and specifically lately, artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, cryptography, and what Tobias and I are going to talk about quite a bit today, large language models. You may have heard of chatbots, ChatGPT, things like that. They're all large language models. I've actually started using these as of 6 months ago in my law practice. And I came across Tobias. Tobias is from Denmark and has a lot of experience in this technology stuff. And he's been writing about artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, large language models. And I started reading his articles and I invited him to come on the podcast because I think he's got a lot of really good things to say. So Tobias, welcome to Lessons from Leaders. How you doing, my friend?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you.
We're going to talk about a bunch of really cool technology topics. Before we get in to the meat of what we're going to talk about, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. You've got kind of a funny accent, at least for us Americans. So where are you from, and how did you get interested in these technology topics?
So I'm from Denmark, so that's why that's where my accent is from. And I got into this topic, mainly AI, technology, blockchain, so forth. My interest in these topics started during law school. And then a couple of years ago, I started my own blog. It was like a WordPress blog back then, pretty old school. Since then, I've moved to Substack. And I just, share my interests. And I like to write also. So that's pretty much it. My interest in these topics started during law school, and now I write about them.
Let's talk about, as an initial matter, let's talk about artificial intelligence generally. There are a lot of deep philosophical questions surrounding artificial intelligence. There's also a lot of practical questions surrounding artificial intelligence. So as a general idea, what are your views on AIs or artificial intelligence?
It's going to change the world for sure. Like how it's going to happen, and all the details are uncertain at best. And I can only guess about it, and everyone can only guess about it. So that's also why it's such an interesting topic to discover, because there's so many questions and not any, real answers.
Yeah, it's in America, we would say it's kind of the Wild West, meaning it's kind of, there's not a bunch of regulations, there's not a bunch of law, there's just it's just kind of an open playing field right now. And I'll tell you, there are two broad camps, Tobias. at least in my view, on the artificial intelligence question. There is a group of people, including a guy named Yudkowsky, I think is how you pronounce his last name, that think artificial
Oh
intelligence is
yeah.
going to kill us. Yeah, and they're convinced of this. Think it'll be the end of the human race, and it's about as pessimistic a view as you can get. There's another camp that thinks that artificial intelligence, like, I don't know, people might know Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist. He says, well, if it starts going crazy, just unplug it.
Mm.
And so there are people that just don't think people that think it's going to be way more positive than negative. What camp do you fall into? Are you worried about artificial intelligence? Are you a pessimist, or are you more of an optimist on what artificial intelligence will do for us?
Kind of find myself in the middle. I'm optimistic, and I'm also kind of worried about all the hype surrounding AI. I see some of the same patterns as with crypto, and as we all know, crypto has had a couple of rough years. And honestly, I could imagine that something similar will happen to AI. There's a lot of hype around it right now, and sooner or later, it's going to come down. And yeah, there are going to be some bubbles that will burst. I'm sure about that. But long term, my long term view is positive.
So it's almost it almost, and I hate to do this to you, but it almost sounds like a situation where there might be a maybe a certain type of flower that is very beautiful that gets completely overpriced. The Dutch tulip bubble craze, you remember that back in the, when was that, the 1600s or something, long time ago. But that I've seen the same thing with crypto, and I think frankly, part of that is people get involved in crypto coins and cryptocurrency, and they don't even understand really what it is. Cryptocurrency, in my view, is just one use case of blockchain technology. Blockchain
Mm.
technology is the real breakthrough. There, cryptocurrencies just kind of sit on top of the blockchain. But blockchain, the idea that you can have proof of identity, proof of work, you can have a distributed ledger that's not you can't modify it, and all this can be digitized through algorithms. That was really the breakthrough with blockchain. But what talking about AI, and by the way, I'm already starting to see this with AI. I mean, there's 1,500 companies already offering artificial intelligence to lawyers and other professionals. So what is it that let's take the negative side of artificial intelligence, and then we'll talk a little bit about the positive side. What is it that worries about, other than the fact that there will be people that invest in things that collapse? What is it about artificial intelligence that worries you the most?
To be honest, I would say that I'm most worried about AI not delivering on its promises. Um, and it will probably fall short of all the hype surrounding it. Um, there's also some more practical concerns regarding misinformation, fake identities, all these kind of things. An interesting point about it is that it kind of makes us think about the internet and social media as well, because many of the dangers that we see with AI now have, for example, misinformation is a pretty straightforward example. It has been, an issue for many years, even before AI became huge. So I think also, like many of the dangers with AI, kind of put a spotlight on these issues that we already have in society, which is quite interesting.
I I I agree with you wholeheartedly. The What I see as a potential danger is you've got all this misinformation or disinformation online already. We've got troll farms in Russia that has been put together by groups specifically to sow discord in other countries. I'm not sure people really recognize how big a problem misinformation and disinformation is. I mean, if you can't trust any information source, having a discussion, having a democracy becomes impossible. I mean, so this is a real big issue. And I want to tie this back to the blockchain at some, if we can, because I think the blockchain offers some potential solutions to that. But I
Mm.
think the point you're raising, Tobias, and the point that I have been thinking about a lot myself lately is if we've had all this misinformation on social media, on the internet for the last decade or so, what's going to happen when we have AIs that can spit out a million times as much misinformation? Like, what is that going to do to the kind of the fabric of our society? Is that kind of what you're worried about?
Yeah, that's part of it. And also now that you bring it up, also, what AI is going to do with work and going to do with education in general.
Yeah,
I'm very positive that AI has a lot of positive use cases in education, for instance, like AI tutoring and so forth. There's definitely going to be a place for that. But there are also a lot of concerns, and there's a lot of problems that humans have never faced before,
yeah.
that we'll have to think about, um, such as how should we relate to artificial intelligence. Should AI have rights? Should we tax it, like the work AI does? Should it have intellectual property rights, and so forth, so forth? So there's a lot of new things. So that's also one of the dangers if AI is moving too fast. Then legislators and the decision makers all around cannot really follow along.
That's a great point. And what I think one of the problems with technology, and I've been a pro technology person since the early 1990s when I first started studying computer science at Texas A&M. But I'm worried about the fact that we have these technology companies and all this power concentrated in a very small number of people that aren't answerable to any specific country necessarily. And even if they are, the like you're talking about, the regulations and the rules and the politics move so much slower than the technology that by the time the rules have caught up, we're already on to a different technology. I'll give you a
Yeah,
perfect example
exactly.
of that. I'll give you a perfect example that in the 1990s, Microsoft had a monopoly on the Windows operating system. It did not have the best technology. Anybody that knows anything about computers knows that the Microsoft operating system and that Windows was terribly engineered. It was subject to all sorts of virus. But if you bought a computer then, you didn't have any choice. You had to use Windows. They literally baked it into the operating system, and they got sued as a result. And they should have been sued for monopolistic behavior, and they were found guilty. But that took so long that by the time that decision came out, Microsoft didn't have a monopoly anymore because Apple and Google and some of the other companies had come along, which I suppose some people will say, well, that's a good thing because the market corrected it on its own. But when you're talking about artificial intelligence, I'm not sure that artificial intelligence is subject to the same type of market analysis and economics as we've seen in the past. What are your thoughts on that, Tobias?
I, I was thinking, one other thing I should mention also in regards to what you said right there is that the whole thing about tech monopolies is also another thing that AI really focuses in on, because can we really allow Google, Meta, so forth, to have so much power about concerning these technologies, or should it rather be open source and kind of like owned by everyone? That's
Yeah.
another question, and again, it's something that I like to think about, but I don't think we can have a definitive answer or anything close to it. But I definitely see a lot of dangers, and it's also something that there's been a lot of talk about, obviously, that these big tech monopolies take ownership over AI. They already have a lot of ownership when it comes to social media, like all the all the apps that we use so many hours a week are owned by like a few companies, and in effect that gives them so much power about they have so much power on our thought processes, our time, our energy, and AI is going to make that even worse, So that's another thing we need to think about with these tech monopolies. I don't know if that was related to your question.
Yeah, that's actually a very good observation, and I think sometimes we're so used to talking about these companies as these entities, these companies, but what we're really talking about when it gets down to it is a few individuals at a few companies that are making decisions that literally affect billions of people. So let's say, for example, in the United States, we wanted to pass a law to regulate Facebook in some way. Well, Mark Zuckerberg could say to the engineers at Facebook, I would like you to pump out as much content as you can about why this is a bad idea. And it would literally influence billions of people. And it would make it almost impossible to pass any laws. And that's because one person made that decision. And to me, that is an existential threat to all of the democracies in the world when you allow a small number of people to have that much decision making authority over so many people. And I always ask, like, how do we get to this point? How do we get to the point where a 40-year-old kid who wanted to date women in college and built an app for it suddenly has power over billions of, like, how do we get to this point? I don't know the answer to that, but it seems rather bizarre.
Yeah, it's these technologies, they are so addictive.
Yeah,
And we haven't really realized how addictive they are, like Instagram, Facebook, and these recommendation algorithms, especially with TikTok. It's extremely addictive and really a nightmare because there's so much stupid content, to be frank.
yeah.
And everyone's just, at least the younger generation, gets addicted to it, right? So it's the addictive nature of this technology that people have not, we're incapable of realizing it. It's like hacking our brains. And I don't know if this is something that they have like talked about at the board meetings and such. I don't think it is. It's just somehow it just hacks into our brain, and we're just, it's just proves that we're basically just animals. Like parts of our brains are very primitive, and
Yeah,
that's the kind of brain that these technologies play around with.
we're already in some very profound ways. We're already under the influence of machines, and what I mean by that is these social media companies. They've hired thousands of psychologists and psychiatrists and neuroscientists who know about, in general, about the way the human mind works, and then they design their algorithms specifically, like you said, to take advantage of the parts of the human brain that are very animalistic. And so, I'll give you a very specific example of this, and I'm sure everybody listening to the podcast right now has had this experience, but you'll get a notification from one of the social media companies that'll say such and such just tagged you in a photo, but it won't show you the photo. And it is next to impossible when you get a notification like that from somebody not to go look at the photo. You just got tagged on a photo by a friend. Psychologically, it is an overwhelming compulsion to go look at that. And that's just one example that I've said this before, Tobias. I used to think at some point we were going to kind of blend into, we're part of our brain would basically be robotic, and we would have, essentially we'd be kind of like cyborgs in a way. I think we're already there. Like when I see people staring at their phone, I used to think that's a human mind looking at the phone. Now, when I see that, a lot of the time I say that's an artificial intelligence programming that mind. What are your thoughts on that, Tobias?
I've had the same idea. I think it was about half a year ago. I wrote an essay where I wrote about how AI is basically humans, pretty much with the same logic that you described. I also wrote about Neuralink, it's very fascinating, the whole idea that you can put a computer chip into the brain, and suddenly you're a cyborg and can do all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah.
So right now we're of course not artificial intelligence in that way, but we're getting there. And we keep our phones in our pockets all the time, and whenever we need some information, we can retrieve it in a matter of seconds. So like 100 years ago, that would be something from a sci-fi movie. So
50
it's
years
pretty
ago.
fascinating to think about.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And this brings in a lot of questions about so you referenced Neuralink, for example. That's Elon Musk's brain chip company. And Elon said when he started the company that the main reason he was doing that is because the human mind didn't have enough bandwidth to download all the information he wanted to download. In other words, it takes a while to read a book. It takes a while to read an email. And if you could just put that into your brain immediately, you could be way more efficient and know a lot more things. I've got some serious questions about whether that's even a good thing. But let me give you an example of where I'm starting to see. So I've used Tobias. Let's talk about law and artificial intelligence. Like I said, I've started to use artificial intelligence in my law practice as of this at the beginning of this year. I got my team together. I said, this is going to change everything. We need to get on top of this. And what I've found is it is miraculous how good it is at some tasks. But
Hmm.
here's one of the downsides. Okay, it is able to produce documents and legal text and questions so quickly that I don't have time to keep up with it. Right. So what I found is it's able to spit out a remarkable amount of information, but my ability to digest and do something with that information hasn't changed. Like I'm the bottleneck now. So let's shift and talk a little bit about your views on the intersection between law and artificial intelligence. What are your views on law and artificial intelligence, and how? And you don't even have to limit it to the law. Let's just talk about the professions in general. What are these artificial intelligence and large language models going to do to the legal profession and the other professions?
Hmm. There was a case in New York a couple of weeks ago where some lawyer was caught red-handed using ChatGPT for a trial.
Yeah,
That
I
was that
think
was
I
a
saw
pretty
that.
that's a pretty good story, and it's pretty illustrative of these technologies. Like in essence, I would claim that they are pretty dumb. Um, I know that there are some specialized law solutions, and I have no doubt in my mind that they can do incredible work, as you say. But there's also the question of like responsibility, like an accountability. Like when do we reach a point where we can say it's still humans who represent people in a trial?
Yeah,
And when can we say that we are so dependent on AI that we could not really, defend people without it? That's my main concern with these solutions, because the problem, as you say, is that they are too good. It's not that they are bad. It's actually that they are too good. So we could easily become reliant on them. And what happens then? Lawyers, and this is not, of course, limited to lawyers, but all professions who rely on artificial intelligence, which is effectively all professions, um, effectively becomes worse and worse at the work they're doing, because they rely more and more on these language models and so forth. And that's a problem, because suddenly we lose sight of what's really going on. And there's this Israeli philosopher. I can't pronounce his name right. It's something like Yuval.
Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah, sure,
Exactly. Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
He gave a talk where he talked about the financial system. Like right now, there are, maybe to be generous, let's say 1% of people in the world who understands how the financial system works. and in a couple of years there will maybe be 0% of people who knows how it works. That's pretty frightening to think about. And already now, it's very, I don't understand how the financial system work, like where does all the money go and so forth. In the end, it's getting really complicated, and we still need human beings behind the steering wheels as long as we want to remain in control. So that's a new concern that we have never really experienced before as a civilization, I would dare to say.
One of the concerns that I have is right now the way large language models work, and this is going to be a very, very high level description of it, but essentially it has a data set, and that data set, at least for OpenAI and some of the other ones, is a subsection and a snapshot of the internet. So OpenAI, there's ways you can plug it directly into the live internet, but generally speaking, it's trained on a set of data. Like if you query the OpenAI 3.5 GPT right now, it'll tell you when the data stops. So it'll say like I've been trained up to 2022, and it'll tell you that.
Mm.
And so it's basically a huge set of data, and then using some statistics and some calculus and some reversion programming techniques, it basically figures out what's the most likely response. And that's really all it is. So like, for example, if you say, write me a poem in the style of James Joyce, it'll go out there and pull all that data out, and then it'll put something together for you. So right now, the way it works is the AI goes and gets information that was largely created by humans and uses that. What I worry about is when we reach that tipping point where the humans aren't creating anything really anymore, and the AI is actually training on things that were created by an AI. Like we won't know the difference between a book written by James Joyce and a book written by James Joyce, the AI. And once we cross that bridge, I worry about whether there's any way of going back. So for example, here's another way to put it. Like if you were to read Ulysses today, and you were to say, boy, that is an unbelievable mind that wrote that, in 100 years, you might have a book and you would say, that's an unbelievable large language model that wrote that. You know what I mean? Like, and when do we cross over? When do we cross over that bridge? What will we even recognize when we cross over it? So I think that's a really fascinating part of this discussion. And, Tobias, I think one thing that a lot of people may not realize consciously is, we have all these people that run the Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, what's his name that runs Apple, Tim Cook, who runs Apple. We have these technology leaders, most of whom are trained in engineering. Many of whom are brilliant people when it comes to technology. But these aren't technological questions necessarily. Like these are philosophical questions, right? And just because you have an engineering degree doesn't mean you know a damn thing about philosophy and ethics and morals and things like that. So we're essentially trusting our ethics and our morals to people that may not have the ethics and morals or the training that we would want. What are your thoughts on that issue, Tobias?
That's the whole problem with incentives, because companies want to make money for shareholders, and the public, we want to have good technologies, and we also want to be safe and be able to sleep well at night. And for these companies, they can make more money by keeping us awake at night and make us insecure about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And that's how the algorithms work. And that's another really fascinating idea, because these algorithms, and also as you mentioned with the large language models, let's take the large language models. They are trained with very impressively large amounts of data, and they are impressively good. And it's true that we can tell how the technology works, but still we don't really know how it works as well as it does. It's still very surprising, as you say, that AI can write a story in the voice of James Joyce with such accuracy. Like, how is that possible? I don't think anyone can give the answer to that. So, and it's kind of the same thing with social media and algorithms. It gets to be a black box where we don't really know why we are shown this video or this post. There's really no one who can tell. And so if we are a bit like dystopian about it, it could be kind of like, an entity of its own, kind of like these algorithms, and the companies doesn't really control them, and we're just consumers who uses them, and we don't know how they work. So yeah, maybe I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, but yeah, I think that is quite fascinating to think about.
I think this raises exactly the philosophical questions we need to be thinking about. And he said something about there's a great saying by the head of Netflix. He said, "Our competition isn't other streaming services. Our competition is sleep," which is a really good way to put it, I think. But there
Yeah.
was actually a Google engineer that, and here's what's going to happen, okay? And I've seen this, even my paralegal, who is really into this technology now, and has used this in our law practice to make herself 10 times more efficient. So it's been really helpful to her. But sometimes she'll text me, she's like, "This thing has a personality. Like I feel like I'm
Mm.
interacting with a personality." And there will be people who will date AIs, maybe marry AIs, maybe
Mm.
leave their estate. I mean, there's going to be a segment of our society that's going to interact with these AIs as if they're conscious entities. And that leads us, of course, into the question that you were asking earlier: is, well, are they conscious? And like, and I guess there's a famous computer science test. Alan Turing, the guy that broke the Nazi Enigma code, has something called the Turing test, which basically is, and this is again a high level description. It's not super detailed, but if you're on the other side of a computer and you're interacting with it and you cannot tell the difference between whether it's a human or not, then that passes the Turing test and it's intelligent. What I've started to question is, like, does it really matter if the thing is, quote, intelligent, if we can't tell the difference? Like, if it's so good at mimicking a
Mm.
human, is there any difference between being so good at mimicking a human but not being conscious, and being conscious and being like, what's the difference? Does it really matter? What are
Mm.
your thoughts on that, Tobias?
I think we have already passed the Turing test. For instance, I recently wrote a post about a company called Inflection AI, and they have a chatbot called HP. And this chatbot was made to, or is it Hey Pi? I'm not sure. Anyway, this chatbot is made to have kind of like human interactions with you. So it uses emojis and it has humor, and it's quite a kind of like a conversational partner. You can use it as a therapist or as a coach,
Wow.
or as a mentor or whatever, like a AI friend basically. And I must say it's very difficult to tell that you are texting a chatbot. You could easily like get the impression that there's a human on the other
Yeah.
side of the screen, and we don't really know. So I'm agreeing with you 100% that the Turing test, it doesn't really, it's not really that significant anymore, because we've
Yeah.
already passed, we have crossed that point.
And so here's kind of my view of the Turing test. And again, the Turing test is basically, you're on the other side of a screen and you're having an interaction. You can't tell whether it's a human or a computer, that would be passing the Turing test. And I guess let's say you built a box of silicon with chips that had some logic to it, and you knew for certain because you built the thing that it didn't have self-referential conscious, that it wasn't conscious. You knew for certain that it was a box with silicon in it, but the person on the other side of the screen didn't know. What's the difference? I guess to me, like, in other words, if that box can mimic a human, what, who cares if it's conscious or not? I mean, there's actually an argument that our brains are that box in some ways, right? Like the human brain, maybe it's not silicon, but it's a series of connections, and the human brain is basically like a deep learning model. It just, and the connections get stronger and stronger after a while. So I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me like maybe the notion of artificial intelligence and the notion of human intelligence is kind of becoming the same thing. Like there's no real difference between an AI and a human intelligence, other than maybe the AI is faster and the human intelligence is a little better with fuzzy logic type of things. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And it's as you say, it's like that with text, and it's also like that with images. If we take a look at Midjourney, for instance, like the kind of images that it can produce, you cannot really tell if it's made by a human or an AI. That's almost impossible.
Yeah.
I believe in the new EU law regarding AI, there's going to be a requirement for companies to label AI generated output. And I think that's a very good idea, because I would at least feel very comfortable if I knew whether I was conversing with an AI or a human being. So I think this is also a good example where laws needs to be put in place and deal with these kind of new scenarios that we have not really experienced before.
Here's the problem with that, though, I think, is, let's say you had a law that said if you create an AI image or an AI video, you have to label it, and that's the law. And somebody decided they didn't want to follow that, and you couldn't tell the difference. How do you enforce that law? And
That's a good question. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and so, for example, let's say somebody wanted to create a deep fake video of Donald Trump. Donald Trump hates dogs, which, by the way, makes him a horrible person. But let's say you had a video of Donald Trump petting a dog with a little baby next to him, and he was like being super nice. I mean, everybody would know that that was a deep fake, because that's not what he's like. But let's say it was so believable, and let's say there was a law that said you had to put a little label that said that's an AI, and the person that created it said, "Nah, I don't want to do that." Who's going to be able to tell the difference? That's where I think, by the way, the blockchain technology comes in. Blockchain,
Hmm.
people associate blockchain with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. And that's just a very, very small use of blockchain. Blockchain is basically a way to put a stamp on something and say, this is legitimate. This is actually, it's called proof of identity. It's been a huge issue in computer science for a very long time. Like, how do I know that the person on the other part, on the other end of this computer that I'm sending this digital money to, is actually who they say they are? Blockchain solves that problem. You could also use blockchain technology on deep fakes in such a way that whether it was stamped as an AI or not, the blockchain would be able to determine, is this actually Barack Obama? In other words, Barack Obama could have his own unique identifier that nobody could access, and the only way that you could determine whether it was actually his video is if it was on the blockchain, like this video is on the blockchain. So I think that's one possible solution to that. Well, Tobias, we've been going for longer than I told you we would go. We could talk about these subject for hours and hours. It's completely fascinating to me because you've got a bunch of super cool technology questions. So if you're a computer geek or a tech geek, you like it. But then you've got all these amazingly deep and important philosophical questions mixed into the technology. So it's a beautiful combination of technology and philosophy. And I hope you keep writing about this because I like everything you write. And at some point, at some point, it may not be you writing it anymore, right?
Yeah, let's check in a couple of years. But
Yeah, for sure.
hopefully,
Let's do that.
hopefully, I would be very sad to have an AI do my work, but we'll see.
I'll tell you real quick before I let you go. I wrote in a legal paper yesterday, and I wanted a quote at the very beginning of the paper that would encapsulate the ideas that I was trying to express in the paper. And I was having trouble thinking of the perfect quote. And so I went to one of my AIs and I said, I'm a lawyer, I'm writing a brief, here's the subject. I'd like 3 technical quotes, 1 sentence or less. I'd like 3 quotes from great literature on the same topic, 1 sentence or less. And I'd like 3 pop culture quotes. And it gave me unbelievable results. And so it didn't write the paper for me, but it was a great way to come up with like creative ideas. I actually used a quote from Salman Rushdie at Midnight's Children. It was the
Oh yeah.
perfect quote. So it's not it's not replacing me as a writer, but it's making my job easier.
Mm. It's also very good for a non-native English speaker like me, that
Yeah,
if I don't know if a sentence is commonly used, then I can ask ChatGPT, or if should I use this word, or could you give me some synonyms?
yeah,
And in that sense, it's kind of like a search engine that has some extra functions. So that's a
exactly.
good way to use it.
And that's what I've noticed it when people first start using it, they think of it as a search engine. But if you learn how to write prompts, it becomes like a search engine on steroids, essentially.
Mm.
It becomes way more than any search engine we've ever had, but you got to write good prompts. Well, Tobias, before I let you go, where can people find you on the internet? And make sure it's actually you and not the deep fake Tobias. Like,
Check out the futuristiclawyer.com. I have a newsletter called The Gap where I write about these topics that I've been talking with Brian about today. So check it out, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. You can use the social icons in my newsletter. That's probably the easiest way to find me.
beautiful. Tobias, it's been a pleasure talking with you, my friend. I'm sure we'll talk again because we are right at the very beginning of what I think will be another revolution in technology, the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen before. So hang in there, my friend. Nice talking to you.
You too. Likewise. Have a good one.